what we consider our best guest ever from Podcast Guest Academy, from Podcast Editor Academy, and of course, where we met here at Podcast Atlanta. Would you please welcome Mr. Mark Deal? What's up, Mark?
I should say that, I'm such a snooty guest. I don't come on every show, but you named this after me. Dealcast. I'm a podcaster with the last name Deal. So thank you for naming the show after me, because that's why you did it, right? Named it to get me on. Like, eventually we will have Mark Deal on. And now you have made that 2-inch step, which is not really a big step at all. So honestly, I'm just excited to be here. Thank you so much, guys, for the invite.
Man, thank you. And yeah, you're right. So now we can quit, Jim. We're done. We're done with the show, ladies and gentlemen. It's been real, but this is really all we've wanted to do is have Mark Deal on Dealcasters. And so, Mark, you'll just take the show from here, right? I mean, it's your show at this point.
Sure, you won't need to ask me any questions at all, because no one really likes conversations. They don't want to hear us talk. They want to hear a monologue for 30 minutes, 60 minutes.
I mean, you could just take Dealcasters live. Jim and I are just going to quit altogether. And from here on Amazon Live, it'll no longer be Jim and Chris. It'll just be Mark Dealcasters. Does that work?
I don't know. I know your attorney because I believe they're also my attorney, and I don't want to be on that side of that person that I won't name. So no, you're good. You're good.
Oh, man. So the reason why I put, and for those of you who are watching and listening now, the reason why I put the best guest ever is that, Mark, you have worked with many podcast guests or prospective guests and podcasters. And as we all know, that's one of the inherent things with a lot of podcasters is not just a solo. You want to get guests. You want to do interviews. You want to get, because that's more content for your platform, like we're doing right now, right? So I guess maybe just tell us a little bit about Podcast Guest Academy and how you've worked with podcasters and working on their interview skills and how that's maybe translated now in the pandemic and doing things in terms of virtual engagement as well.
Yeah, certainly. Thank you, Chris. I started Podcast Guest Academy from my role as a podcast director working with law firms. I would have very knowledgeable attorneys, knowledgeable professors, and people that can talk for like 30, 60 minutes, 3 hours at a time, like I was joking about earlier, because no one really likes that. And it was a challenge for me as not just a podcast producer and editor, but a director directing the conversation, basically saying, cut, all right, let's back up. This is going on way too long. We need a transition in here. And from that, I developed a set of skills. And I don't want to sound like I'm quoting a movie, a guy on a phone that has a certain set of skills that makes me particularly dangerous. But honestly, I took and boiled down some of the techniques and tactics that I was teaching people that were coming on the shows I was working on, and showing other people how to do that. So not just how to find the best podcast for them and their message, or how to reach out in a way that actually gets booked. Because Jim, Chris, I know you probably have received more than your fair share of guest outreaches like, hey, I want to be on your show. Big thing about them. But I focus a lot on how to perform those interviews well and then leverage them on their book, brand, or business.
What do you think sometimes, Mark, is the biggest challenge for people when it comes to the whole idea? Like maybe they don't have a podcast of their own and they want to be a guest. Do you think it's they're afraid to ask, or they don't really like look at like, does this show make sense for me to even approach? I mean, what do you think is one of the challenges there?
I think starting out, it's equipment. And as you know, and as regular viewers and listeners of this show know, the equipment isn't tough. And now the equipment is easily available with a couple of clicks. It shows up at your door within a couple of days. I mean, that was unheard of back in the day. So that bar doesn't exist anymore. But some people build it up in their mind like they need to go out and go shopping for 3 days and pay $300 or more for all this stuff. And possibly they're going to get the wrong thing because they just listened to a salesperson vice reading reviews from people like them. We know that that's not the case. So I don't think it's the equipment anymore. I think part of it is how to reach out in a way that actually makes a solid connection, and then how to perform those interviews well. How long should somebody spend answering a question before they get to a point? If you have 3 points or 5 points, do you really have a point at all? And if you get stuck somewhere in a podcast interview, how do you help the host pull it off the rails? Do you use an analogy? Do you use a quote? How do you find those things? How do you source those things? How do you have them ready for the interview in case you need them? And I think setting up those safety nets for people make it easier for them to reach out and get booked on shows, as well as have the best interview that podcast host has ever had. So when they think about, who was the best guest that I ever had on? Like, well, I had Obama on, I had Trump on, but Mark Deal was pretty good.
He was
He was the best, right? That's what I want for me. That's what I want for everybody I work with. Like, wow, it wasn't so much the big name, but it was somebody that really delivered a good show.
Do you work with people who just want to be guests exclusively, or both podcasters who also want to be guests on other people's shows? Is it yes, or is it mostly one or the other?
Well, it's a different set of skills, Chris. And I found that a lot of podcasters, people that are hosts, people that are used to controlling the flow of the interview, they may think they make great guests. And that might be true because they have the hardware. So the microphones and everything is out, but controlling and pacing the side of the guest side of the interview and the conversation is a different skill altogether. And some podcasters and even some guests, quite honestly, either side of the mic, they feel like it's a race. Like, I want to get there first. I want to show that I know more than the other person. Like, no, it's really a 3-person relay. And you need to make sure that the host, the guest, and the listener crosses the finish line at the same time. And I think it's pacing yourself as a host and pacing yourself as a guest, and calling back to that listener and making sure that they're keeping up with you so you all cross the finish line together. Those are the skills that makes a good podcaster and a good podcast guest. It's just different applications and some different tips and tactics.
Yeah, because I think we've all been in podcasts where we were the host and we would have a guest on, and it just felt like they had things that they wanted to check off. And, I got to mention my book. I have all of these phrases. I'm going through this. And they're sort of answering the questions, but they're pulling it. It just felt like they're just using they're just using the platform just to deliver that. And it comes across that way. And then they'll go on 4, 5, 6, 7 other podcasts, and they all are very, very, very similar. And so it really works against, I think, the guest, where it's like you may listen to somebody do a podcast and go, I really like that. I'm going to hear them when they go on another show. And if you hear something different, then you got a fan. Then you've got somebody who's going to follow you around, and that's a skill, like you said, that really needs training.
Right. And I think it's on the host to ask different questions, because if somebody wants me to share a show, I want them to explore different aspects of me that wasn't explored on other shows. And I think that has to do with the hosting and the questions. And if they ask me really good questions and bring out a different side of me that has been shared on other shows, that's what I'm going to share. But if somebody asks me the same questions over and over again, I'm like, well, I just tweeted that out. I just shared that on Facebook. That was on my LinkedIn post from the show I did previous to yours. Why share it again? I agree.
That's a great point. And Mark, as I guess with the Podcast Editor Academy, you're teaching people how to edit podcast. Have you seen a rise, like especially now Amazon, has their own, hosting a podcast through Amazon Music. There's a lot of people talking about, but I want to do a video with my podcast. And it's somewhat of a challenge, I think. I mean, Chris and I talk about this a lot, because you got to remember that if you're actually doing a podcast and you're talking about things that maybe are visual, the podcast listener is not going to see that. Do you kind of coach them about that if they want to try to combine the two mediums?
Well, for guests and podcasters, the people that are performing the interview, not editing it, we talk about how to use analogies and colorful language and adjectives so people can feel what you're talking about. I'll be honest, I'm not a very emotional guy. My EQ is pretty low, probably lower than your normal person. But I've learned how to talk on a podcast interview so that emotional people can follow what was going on with me internally, even though that's not my natural language. So that's more of a role of the podcaster and the guest. Not so much the editor. I do think there's things that the editor can do to enhance that by cutting out the ahs. So, yeah, like for sure, 100%, all the things I just said that are filler words. And you're laughing because you've heard them all before. And I probably said a few earlier, and we'll say some more as we continue on. But I think editors can do a lot to cut out the filler words in respect of the listener's time, because these shows are syndicated, tens, hundreds, or thousands of times. And if you can save 5 minutes, 10 minutes out of a show, I mean, you save the world hours and hours of horrible filler word content.
I tell you, the best way for at least for me, I can't say for everyone, but the best way to get rid of the ums and the ahs and the knows, which I'm super famous for, is to edit your own voice saying those words, because it will drive you through a wall doing that. I just said so it helps you sort of go through all of that when you're editing it, and eventually you're like, oh my gosh, this is driving me crazy. As an editor, that helped me tremendously when I was doing my own podcast or showing up on other people's podcasts, is not just listening to yourself back, because you don't always have time to do that. But when you're editing, you're listening to it over and over and over again, sometimes 1.5, 2 times speed. But in any event, you still hear those ums and ahs. So.
And if you want to have another solution, join Toastmasters, because now every time my wife says so, I had to correct her last night. We were having a conversation. I said, do you realize how many times you said so in the last 2 minutes? I was like, I'm going to make you start going to Toastmasters.
And Toastmasters is great for public speaking, for long monologues, but some of the tactics and tips that they teach you at Toastmasters doesn't make for a good conversational podcast interview. But you're right, as far as the filler words. And I found, Jim, you were talking about with your wife, I found that my filler words come a lot from my family. If I hop on the phone call with my mom and dad, I recognize the filler words that I thought I cut out of my language a few months ago, and they're saying it often. And then you kind of fall right in step with that and start doing the same thing. So yeah, it's understanding where those filler words come from and then how you use them and why you use them.
Yes.
So Mark, who's your favorite podcast interviewer, host?
Eric Hundley.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I hopefully that was a good answer. I didn't know you were going to ask me that question.
Yeah.
You know Eric?
Yeah, I know Eric, and I know his podcast well. And the content is it you feel like his content's super interesting as well, and he takes really great risks, I think, in terms of what he, the guests that he has, and yeah, wow, that's I would say it's a surprise, but not a surprise, because he is great. But wow, okay, excellent. And why would you say Eric's a great host?
He challenges his guests in a respectful way, and he also challenges the listener. I have been in that invisible third seat, and a good podcaster and a good podcast guest and interviewee will acknowledge the third person, the empty seat, the silent listening seat, and bring them along in the journey. And I'll listen to one of Eric's shows on Unstructured, and it really is unstructured, but it's so good. And I feel like I'm going through this mental thing. What's going to happen? I think I know what's going to happen. I think I'm learning something. And then at the end, as Eric is challenging his guest or challenging himself, he does it in such a way. He also challenged the listener on their understanding. And, there's been a number of times listening to Eric's show, like, wow, he has changed my opinion on something. How often does that happen on social media? Almost never. But
Never.
On Eric's show, pretty frequently.
Wow. So now I'm going to have to go subscribe to that. You've got me.
Oh, yeah. And he's got a great YouTube channel as well. We should throw that up on the show. We'll definitely put it in the show notes afterwards. So, wow, excellent answer. That was, I mean, you could have went like Howard Stern, or whatever, but it's like,
Yeah,
you know,
I feel bad. I feel bad, Chris, with as many podcasters I know that you didn't prep me with that question. And like, who's your favorite? I'm like, all right, I guess I got to be honest. Eric Hunley. So for everyone else, I apologize, but go listen to Eric, and now you know why.
So there's going to be a ton of podcasters that are like, he didn't say mine was the favorite. He told me mine was the favorite.
Everyone else, you're a close second.
It's like your favorite kid, right? You're all my favorite. It just at the moment, right?
Well, I'm just mad that you didn't say me, Mark. So
again, close second, Chris. Close second.
Yeah, whatever. So we haven't talked yet about Podcast Atlanta. And Mark, I just got to thank you for putting that thing together. And for those of you who watching, listening, Podcast Atlanta, let me see if I can get this right. It at least was when Meetup was, a thing for physical meetups. And I know people have been trying to do that virtually, but I'm not even sure where that's at right now. But when physical meetings were a thing, Podcast Atlanta was the fastest growing meetup on meetup.com. Do I have that right?
It was the fastest growing podcast meetup on meetup.com in the world. And we were second largest in the world. Number one started in Florida over 10 years ago. We were about 4 years old, and we were on their heels before COVID. So January, we had 100 people. You guys were there. February, we had about 100 people. And then March, I took a break because I did my own conference at Orlando. And then, of course, the world changed. So
just a little,
just a little.
But yeah, and it's great this is kind of a weird sort of full circle thing, because we did have Audrey Belkearney on here a couple months ago as well, who, I went to her meetup at first, and she was like, you've got to meet Mark Deal, and he does Podcast Atlanta. You've got to hook up with him. And so I was like, okay. And then the next one I went to, and of course I met you, and I also met this guy below me, Jim Fuse, and the rest is history. So that's the way it's supposed to work, right? You find good people, you surround yourself, iron sharpening iron, the whole thing. So I just have to really just thank you, Mark, for putting that thing together. I know you're still working on that. Of course, it's, the way the world is right now, it's a little difficult to do that. I know you're doing, things remotely as much as you can, and bringing people on and doing that. So it's just been a great experience for Jim and I. So thank you.
I'm glad we all found each other through a local meetup. Podcasting, let's be honest, it's pretty lonely. A lot of us do remote recordings, and here we are. I mean, granted, this is the age of COVID, but even before then, many of us did remote interview recordings. We never really got together until we had things like Podcast Atlanta, and everyone really enjoyed it. And then the world changed. So yeah, we'll get back to some sense of normalcy eventually, and I'm looking forward to that day.
Got it. Cool. Well, I know you've given us a bunch of stuff here that you've purchased on Amazon and is a part of your workflow. And I was like, "Are you kidding me? This is like I'm going to learn along with everyone else here." There's some great things on here. I mean, obviously the headphones that we have in the carousel, those are well-known headphones it's funny, you pulled it out and I could hear my own voice. That's how good those headphones are.
Sorry.
Or how good that microphone probably is.
The headphones.
Yeah. Go ahead.
It's like X-ray vision for your ears, honestly. And I usually don't use these when I'm doing a live video. I've got the, much like you're wearing, Jim, I got the invisible behind the ears thing that work out well even with my bald head. But again, these are like X-ray vision for my ears. I can hear somebody like, "Do you have a dog 3 houses over? Can you shut the door?" And the people that are on the microphone they don't know, but with these, I can hear it. And they're pretty comfy.
That's too funny.
Yeah, those are Jim, I don't know if we want to share the screen on that. These are headphones I remember going into recording studios. These are pretty much standard recording studio headphones. Not only are they less than $100, but they are, like you said, highly accurate too. It's not like you're going to get like extra bass those types of, because I think for what you're doing, for what I do, I use I have Audio Technica headphones as well that are like, what you hear is what you get, right? You don't want extra stuff, because when you're editing and you have extra stuff in your ears, what ends up being exported doesn't sound the right way in the end, right?
It flavors the mix. Yep. Right. And these don't.
Yeah, and when you and I talked about that, Chris, I had never thought about that, right? That you don't always realize that the headphones you're listening to can impact you in the editing space because you're not really hearing the true sound. I think it's pretty fascinating, as a both a podcaster and a listener to think like, oh, I never thought about that, because it's kind of like what they call it, WYSIWYG, what you see is what you get. Mm-hmm. Kind of the same thing with earphones, right? You want to hear what you're putting out, because then you're like, oh gosh, I just wasted all this time and it's not what I thought it was going to sound like. I mean, Mark, have you run into that a lot? I mean, how do you coach folks in the Editor Academy about that?
I can almost tell if I listen to somebody's show. I was like, do you have like Beats by Dr. Dre that you're listening to when you mix this? Like, yeah, how can you tell? Like, because everyone sounds tinny. Basically, they're playing with the mix, wearing these bass heavy headphones. Meanwhile, the rest of the world listening to in our car or earbuds or something, it all comes across tinny. So yeah, I can listen to a show like, wait a minute, you're not listening to big can, flat curve, flat frequency reproduction type headphones. So it may seem like a lot, $100. Do you need this to podcast? No. Do you need this to be a podcast guest? No. If you are editing or remixing or remastering a show, do you need these or something like these? Yes, because it will give you accurate reproduction while you're editing. And like I said, even while you're hosting, you can hear things that no one else can.
Yeah, and I think you brought up another great point on these, Mark, and it's what I like about the Audio Technica ones that I have is comfort. It's important if you have a job or you're on videos like this many hours during the day, or you're using them, or you just want to listen to music or whatever. You've got them on for 6, 8, however many hours a day. They've got to be comfortable, and so these are extremely comfortable. I know you just replaced your ear pads, right, for these headphones, because you've worn them so long, of course, that's a negligible expense and that's just a testament to how great the headphones are. You're like, I'm not going to use this opportunity to buy a different pair of headphones. I'm going to replace the pads. I want the headphones, right?
Yeah, and it's a good set of headphones when you type in, MDR 7506 ear pads, and there's tons of options on Amazon. You can even get the right color that matches your brand if that's something for you. But the fact that there's so many ear cushion replacements for these, it's not a testament that these cushions are bad. It's just that no one wants to get rid of these headphones once they have them.
Wow.
It's like a nice pair of jeans, right? You want to wear them forever. Tell your wife says there's too many holes in your certain area.
It sounds like the conversation I just had recently. Thank you, COVID.
Oh, good deal. All right. So there it is. I keep on saying good deal. And then earlier I said, so Mark, is this your deal? I mean, I can't get away from it. I use the word deal so much, Mark. I'm just such a huge fan of yours.
No worries, Chris. I've refrained from doing the stoned
right.
Thing. I'm sure you've heard those jokes frequently. So yeah, don't worry. It's not even hitting me.
We've all got those joke names, like me, with being fused. It's like, don't blow a fuse, or this you get used to.
Got a short fuse.
Yeah.
Right.
I'll tell you what I found fascinating. Let's talk about Mark's computer world thing that he has created. This, I had no idea that for $114, I could start a computer. Because, when back in the 90s, for those people that were alive, I used to play with computers, right? Because it was like you could pull stuff out, put stuff in. So this reminds me of those days when like you would take the 24.4 modem and then put in the 56.6 card, and everybody's like, woohoo, we've got double dial-up speed now. So this is fascinating, Mark. I mean, tell us more.
Yeah, this is the expensive version because it's got like two cables to run two 4K monitors. This is the Raspberry Pi 4. And techno geeks already know about the Raspberry Pi. If you are somebody that likes to tinker around with computers or code, I'll warn you, this is more of a black hole than Clubhouse. The Raspberry Pi, you can do anything with. I set it up to be a retro gaming station with like 8,000 games on it. I was setting it up to block the ads, internet ads for my kids, and run a VPN server and a mirrored RAID array. In fact, I bought a couple of them. So I had one here, and I've been really enjoying. This has been my COVID project. I'll grab it I want to try a piece of code. I stick it on there. I'll reformat it. Like, can I get it to do the thing that I want it to do? But it's pretty powerful. Gigabit Ethernet, USB 3.0 and 2.0, 4K. You can run two 4K monitors and like 30 frames per second, not 60. But hey, it's a Raspberry Pi, and it runs off of 5 volts, I think 3 amps, super low power. And it's just, you can overclock these things if you want, or just run code really efficiently. We've all had some type of crazy COVID project, whether it's I'm going to refinish furniture or knock out the honey to-do list. If my wife is watching this, I'll get to it eventually, sweetie, I promise. But this has been a ton of fun. This has been a ton of fun.
So I guess, what are some practical applications that someone could use for this?
Well, me being a podcaster, I was able to install Audacity, which is a program that you can use to record and edit a podcast. It works on Windows, it works on Mac, and it runs on Linux, which this thing runs on. So a tiny little computer, I was able to run Audacity. And then you mentioned, Jim, at the top of the show, you're running a Samsung Q2U, great microphone. I plugged one of those up to the Raspberry Pi. It saw it, and I was able to record in Audacity. Wow. And then open up a web browser and use a typical, web recording software. There's various different names, but yeah, you could have a low power podcasting station off of a Raspberry Pi. Heck, a battery that you would plug up to this would be bigger than this little computer. It's been lots of fun.
Now, have you tried like daisy chaining it in a sense to like a Windows or Apple? Because I could see, or maybe even with a switcher, you could possibly use this in conjunction with a switcher. Is that something you've tried yet?
I haven't, honestly, because you can have a KVM switch, a keyboard video monitor switch, and go from like your laptop to the Raspberry Pi. But I have had this up in right now I'm in my recording studio, but I've had this up in 2 floors above in what the kids have called the smart room, and running a video game arcade thing with a bunch of old retro games from when I was a kid.
Wow. That's what I would do. That's exactly what I would do is to do that. 'Cause those units that you see that you can buy, the retro arcades that go up on your, this is what's powering those things is the Raspberry Pis?
It possibly could be. Now these can run up to like a PS1 game. Now, if you want to play something like for, PS2 or like a really higher end game, you'd probably want some mini computer board and graphics cards. But for like most games, and again, I am a gentleman of a certain age. I enjoy my Pac-Man and Q*bert and a lot of games from the 80s and 90s.
Maybe some Dig Dug or some Joust. How about some Joust? Defender?
Joust, Defender 2. I was playing a lot of Defenders and Mario games. various Super Marios from various Nintendos. It's been lots of fun. And that's the gaming aspect. But I'm also like, oh, can I get it to edit podcasts? Oh, I can. Can I get it to record? Oh, I can. Can I record a remote interview over the web browser on this little thing? Wow, I can do that. I can do that too. And then doing like the VPN and the tech fun stuff. It's just been a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's tempting for me because, I in my upstairs office, I have a Mac and I do a lot of video editing. And when you do that, it's a RAM hog. You basically can't do much of anything else if you wanted to really crank and get done and render and share and everything you need to do with large HD video. And so this is tempting for me to say, well, I have a bunch of other stuff and I can kind of integrate that in my workflow where I can go, okay, I'm going to let this thing cook. And instead of me like doing something or not doing something else, I can actually move to a small workstation to be able to crank out something somewhat efficiently. So
yeah,
it's something I can kind of multitask, so to speak.
Oh, I see. Yeah, I wouldn't use this for like video editing.
No. I would use it for other stuff. Let do video editing while my computer is like rendering the video and stuff. I would go to something like this and do something that was wouldn't be a video for sure.
Right. Exactly. I mean, if you wanted to set up like a portable podcasting thing, instead of having a laptop, you had a Raspberry Pi, a Zoom PodTrack P4 and a Pelican case, and you show up to somebody's, office or something, and you've got your microphones there. You could hook up to like, big 48-inch 4K TVs to be your monitor, or just have a little battery powered monitor. At some point you're like, oh, let me just bring a laptop. But yeah, this you could do a lot with this. And like I said, they're a ton of fun. There's so many people that are donating, contributing code that they've developed to get these to do, different things. I was looking at making a night vision bird cam for a birdhouse. There's all sorts of, I'm telling you, if you want to look at for Raspberry Pi projects, there's tons of them. It's a black hole you'll fall into, because I did.
Well, I could definitely see where you could do that, because like I said, I used to play with this stuff all the time, and then it just got to be too expensive to keep upgrading the computer. But this is like, I mean, you could buy how many of these for the cost of a high-end laptop and probably come up with all kinds of crazy things. And I'm sure they're going to keep there's one in here, 8 gigs of RAM, right? Imagine if you had 16, right? You'd probably like, wow, it's like, Star Wars.
And this kit is it's got 2 monitor cables. I'm only using one. It's got all sorts of parts that you probably don't need. And honestly, like I ended up buying a couple of Raspberry Pis. If you just want the board, that's like $35-$40. All the extra little plastic pieces cost. Again, the kit's easy to get started, but this stuff is super cheap. So you could have a 4 gig or maybe even an 8 gig single board on a computer, very thin, for like $50. It was very affordable and fun.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, if you think about it, when you ever get back to, quote unquote, being able to travel around, I actually don't disagree with your premises. Like, okay, I'll just put this in a Pelican case, right? That'd be even perfect. And I can take this with me, and I don't need a lot of power to run it. And then even what you were saying, like with the camera stuff, that's intriguing, right? If you can maybe put this in something waterproof and have a way to power it. I mean, yeah, it got my brain spinning. You're going to put me into that Raspberry Pi black hole. That's okay.
Yep.
I did have a question about the Raspberry Pi. Do you think it would be possible to use an old iPad and use that as a monitor with that? Because I want to say that I've heard that somebody has used that, so you can somehow rig it into an iPad and use that. Is that possible? Have you heard that? Possibly.
Again, it would just take some quick Googling to find out. Now, I did find projects where people were using a Raspberry Pi for storage and putting like terabytes of storage on a Raspberry Pi, and then were connecting their iPad to the Raspberry Pi to offload videos and things. And perhaps they even, this use case was with an iPad, but maybe even with now with the iPhone 12 Pro and all those super Whamidine cameras, well, they're going to eat storage if you're recording, really high def HDR videos. But they came up with a method like, oh, here's how you offload it into a Raspberry Pi. I mean, I wouldn't edit on it, but it's great for storage. It really all depends. I guess the last word I have on Windows versus PC versus Linux, it's almost the same as I tell editors that work in Audacity or Audition or Pro Tools or Reaper or Hindenburg, all those programs. It's not so much that one is better than the other. It's learn to use whatever tool you're going to use well, vice hopping to something else.
I use Logic Pro X, and the reason why I use Logic is because I used it for music for years. GarageBand before that, and then you graduate up. It's like and then I've tried, and played around with Hindenburg. I know enough to be dangerous with Audacity. I've used Audition and all of those, but you got to have one that you master, so to speak, so that when you're cranking it out and you need to, crank out 12 podcasts in a short amount of time or whatever, editing wise, you can't use 6 different programs. You got to use the one that you feel like is the best for you. But yeah, I'm the same way. It's like, listen, if you're in Reaper is your jam and you know how to use it really well, awesome. It doesn't mean that a podcast edited in Reaper is going to sound better than one that's edited in Audacity. It has to do with the user, really.
That's absolutely right.
And Mark, your microphone really sounds good. I mean, and it's one of those things. It kind of is that whole. I don't know if you want to call it the battle of, do you use a shotgun mic or not? And you obviously have been using this for a while. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I started using this microphone about 5-6 years ago, and other podcasters told me I was doing it wrong. Because apparently there's a right way and a wrong way to podcast. I should not be using a shotgun microphone. But then you look over at the voice artists, they were all using shotgun microphones. So I wanted to have a microphone that I could consistently use on a podcast and a video stream, a live stream like this, to where it wasn't blocking my face. I didn't want to go to a shotgun for one or a lapel for one, and then like a really nice microphone that's a couple inches from my face on a podcast. So I ended up picking up this. Yeah, you saw it's pretty cheap when it comes to shotgun microphones. $170. That's about as cheap as you can get a shotgun mic. Yeah. But I never really felt the need to upgrade. I mean, I have other gear as well, but this microphone has treated me well. There's been a few times I wanted to get something else, but I'm like, this one works out well. I will say anyone that wants to get a shotgun microphone for live streaming or podcasts to learn how to use it, because it's very sensitive. You got to have to be right in the sweet spot or else it sounds horrible.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's a great point. I mean, I think that's always the challenge, right? If you're going to switch things up, you got to make sure you try it out first. Like if I were to go buy that and like tomorrow I'm going live and all of a sudden I'm like, well, that's what you get for not really checking it out. And, Chris and I always talk about too, you're going to sound different with different microphones. I mean, I've had this Samson Q2U now for probably over a year and I love it. And it's like, it was a $70 mic. Do I really want to go and buy something that's $300 or $400 if everyone says my audio sounds fine? Maybe I could buy some lights or go buy a couple Raspberry Pis.
Yeah, my thing on microphones as well as cameras is, if your room doesn't have any sound treatment, if you have a $1 room and $1,000 mic, you're going to have a $1 recording. If you've got, $1 lighting and $1,000 camera, you're going to have a $1 video. So work on other things, obviously, as you've done, Jim, because your Q2U, really easy mic, really inexpensive mic, sounds great because you have figured out the other things that affect sound quality. I mean, for example, your mic technique is spot on. You're not
Thank you.
puffing the peas right in the mic. And I'm doing that just for effect, but you obviously aren't.
But trust me, with the sound snob below you, I'd hear about it.
No, it's true. And a lot of people, when they say to me, like, what's, they'll ask me all the time about what's the best microphone and you get it, I'm sure, Mark, all the time as well. Or what's the best way to record all that stuff. And I say, you start with mic technique. Don't talk directly into or speak directly into the microphone, because those plosives come out of your mouth and push air into your microphone. And if you did it on your mic, well, you just did it on your microphone, but it's a condenser mic, right? And so those are made to, people would say, and probably the people that told you that you shouldn't be getting that for podcasting, those are all used in, for like cymbals and drums, right? And, picking up room noise and doing all that. But if you use it in the right way, like you're using, and you're aiming it in the right way, from wherever you're at, you used it effectively, because like you're like, okay, I want something that sounds really good, but I don't want it in front of my face. I just, and so you found a way to directionally, have a microphone and get the best sound. You didn't spend, $400 for a Shure SM7B. You didn't need to. Nothing against that mic. I think they're great mics, but if you don't need it, why re-up, use it for something else. Like,
do you think of the lighting you could buy with that money, right? I mean, or even buying some in-ear monitors like we've talked about, right? There's so many things you could do, as opposed to like, oh, I'm going to get this, because really, how is that change in microphone going to, I like to say, move the needle, right? I mean, is it really going to make that big a difference? I don't know. I mean, a lot of things I could think about spending that money on. I mean, heck, we talked about it, Chris, just the other day. We had a guest on the Tim and Jim show last week, and it's like, if anything, I want to improve my studio, right? I can, maybe put some board on one of my walls, and now I can have multiple angles with cameras and things. I don't need a new microphone, but this is a definitely, I like that. It's got me intrigued again, Mark. I don't know. I'm going to end up spending a lot of money on Amazon because of you, but it's all right.
And again, this shotgun microphones can easily hit $1,000. Movie theaters here in Atlanta have great shotgun microphones for shooting movies. I'm not using one of those. I just have this, less than $200 microphone, and I like it.
Do you have it going into any particular interface?
I used to have it going into my DBX286S, and I love it. It's like Photoshop for your voice. However, for this interview, I'm not using it because I'm in the process of rearranging my studio. And like I said, I love it. It's like Photoshop for your voice. You can set up the noise gate, the compression, certain frequencies, de-essing. For example, and forgive me for anyone that is about to listen to what I'm going to say, Superman swims in his super swimming pool. Now, with my voice and those S's, it really doesn't come off that well, especially with a condenser microphone. But when I patch, and I'm pointing it over it, even though the lights aren't flashing, my DBX 286S, also available on Amazon, does a great job with any microphone. It's powerful enough to power a Shure SM7B, which is a very power-hungry microphone. Yet, there's enough configuration to make a shotgun condenser sound sweet as butter. So I like to have my voice sound as good while recording, vice trying to fix it in post. So live streams like this, it sounds consistent. That being said, it's currently unplugged, so it's not doing me any good as I'm moving stuff around. And then, it goes into an interface, which really doesn't do much other than turn the audio into to a digital signal for my computer to understand. Right. Most of the magic happens with the piece of equipment that's not plugged up right now.
We'll be sure to put that in the carousel after the fact. But yeah, that's a rack mount. That thing's been that thing's like not a new piece of gear, but it's that DBX. But it is just a fantastic, like you said, it's a bit of a Swiss Army knife in terms of what you can do to the signal before you're sending it in and digitizing it there.
It is. It's been around for over a decade. I kind of hate the fact that it's a rack mount. I even built, I have a standing desk that I built, and I built my own little mount for it. And it's clunky. but it works so well. And I hate the fact that I then have to run it through another interface to get that analog signal into a digital signal. I really wish they would update it and make it something that fits on a desk and digital signals come out, but they haven't. And it works so well. Maybe they're like, well, why fix something that's not broken?
Right.
And that's a great point, Mark. I think that's what happens too. A lot of times with us whether it's podcasters or live streamers, like you want to get something just because it's the shiny object. And if it's not broken, why fix it? I think, just like you said, you've had this mic for several years. I can't see any reason why I would upgrade my microphone. If anything, I might upgrade my camera, but then I love the analogy of $1,000 camera, $1 light, you got a $1 camera. So you really got to think these things through. And I think, just great pearls of wisdom. Thanks.
You're welcome, Jim.
Mark, I can't tell you how much we appreciate you coming by. This has been, one of our better shows in terms of the Raspberry Pi stuff alone. I mean, come on. First time I would venture to guess, Jim, that no other Amazon live streams have talked about Raspberry Pi 4.
Right? This
is it. I bet you that we broke the levee there. That is it. This is the first time that's been done on Amazon Live. But I mean, awesome. Seriously.
You and I were both
to play Defender.
When he said this, he's like, Raspberry Pi is like, are we selling food? I mean, what is this?
And Amazon has all sorts of fun little cases that people have made. There's all sorts of, I'm telling you, it's a black hole. You'll fall down. But Jim, it sounds like you were an IT guy back in the day, much like I was. And the ability to just have a computer that fits in your hand that you can just start playing code on and playing games and whatever. It's lots of fun.
Yeah, I kind of miss those days. This might, like you said, might give me another hobby. Like I need that.
You're right. Yeah, it was a perfect COVID project.
So, Mark, if for our viewers and listeners who want to connect with you and perhaps are interested in Podcast Editors Academy or Podcast Guest Academy, where can they connect with you?
Well, if you're an editor and want to learn more about editing and then grow your editing business, how to find clients and keep clients and raise your rates and get more clients, head over to podcasteditoracademy.com. And that's where we teach people how to run their podcast editing business. And for others that want to grow their business, perhaps their book brand or business, and they want to do those through podcast interviews, then my website for that is Podcast Guest Academy. That's where we show you how to find the best podcast for you and your message, how to reach out to those podcasters in a way that actually gets you booked, how to perform them well. And that's where we spend a lot of time and focus because other resources really don't talk about how to perform interviews well. And then leverage them for your book brand or business. That's over at podcastguestacademy.com. And if you're a podcaster local to Metro Atlanta, check us out at Podcast Atlanta. We're on Meetup. Our website is podatl.com, or just type in Podcast Atlanta in Google. Google will treat you right and bring you straight to us. We did have monthly meetings back when we could do such things, and now we're not so much. But when the world turns back to normal, I know I am, as well as my sponsors, are looking forward to hosting events once again.
And we can't wait to attend. I know I'm looking forward to getting back out there. Whenever it makes sense, we'll be there, Mark, with bells on.
Excellent. Well, I look forward to having you there, Jim.
So once again, it's Podcast Editor Academy. It's Podcast Guest Academy. And is it PodATL? Is that?
PodATL.com is the website. And for editor, you could type in editors plural. That'll send you to us as well. We have all the domains. Whenever there's singular and plural, we make sure to register all of them and just send you to one website because who knows?
And you know what we should do is Raspberry Pi Academy. I think that's the next one.
I think that's called YouTube.
Exactly. Awesome. Well, Mark, thanks again. We appreciate your time and your knowledge and your wisdom. It's been fantastic. So thanks for joining us.
Thanks again, everyone. Thanks for listening to Dealcasters. Congratulations. You've taken another step forward in your content creation journey. Please don't forget to hit the subscribe or follow button here in your favorite podcast player so you can be reminded every time we drop an episode.
We love hearing from our listeners and viewers. And if you're wanting to watch our shows live on Amazon, feel free to follow Dealcasters Live as well at dealcasters.live. Follow us on Twitter or subscribe to our YouTube channel, where we also included added content that you cannot find anywhere else.
If you have questions about this episode or have something you want us to review, you can also email us at dealcasters@dealcasters.live. Thanks again for listening, and you know the deal. Don't fear the gear.